January 14th, 1944. The snow outside Monte Cassino didn't fall in gentle flakes that morning. It drifted sideways in long, ghostly sheets, pulled by a cold wind that scraped across the ruined fields like a blade. American infantrymen moved carefully through the shattered olive groves at the foot of the mountain, stepping around frozen shell holes and the blackened remains of farmhouses hit days earlier. Among them walked a man whose name barely appeared in after-action reports, whose exploits rarely made it into the official histories, but whose methods would spread through entire companies before the year was out. Private First Class Sam Harlow, 26 years old, lean, quiet, and outwardly unremarkable, carried a scoped Springfield rifle slung across his shoulder. He had the demeanor of a man who wanted to be invisible, not because he was timid, but because invisibility was the one advantage he refused to give up. Harlow didn't swagger like some sharpshooters. He didn't brag. He didn't lecture. He simply observed. And on that bitter morning, with German paratroopers dug into the heights above and Allied units pinned down for the third week in a row, his ability to observe would be tested in a way that no manual had ever prepared him for. The German snipers had been tormenting the Allied line since late December. Perched among the rocky outcrops and half-collapsed monastery walls, they fired with unnerving accuracy at any movement below. Runners were shot. Medics were shot. Even men carrying ammunition crates in 2s and 3s were taken out one by one. The bullets landing with such precision that officers whispered about a master sniper, someone trained far beyond the typical Feldjäger or Fallschirmjäger marksman. Some claimed it was a competition shooter from Bavaria. Others said he was an ex-police sharpshooter. But every man agreed on one thing. Whoever the German was, he was better than anything the Americans had dealt with so far. Harlow wasn't the best-paid sniper, nor the most decorated, nor the most formal. He had learned to shoot long before the army, on the dusty plains of Oklahoma, using rusty cans and broken fence posts as targets. His father taught him to find angles, to let the wind speak to him, and to treat silence as a weapon. But the army hadn't taught him what he learned the day before. It had happened almost by accident. Near dusk, he'd found a broken, palm-sized shard of mirror inside a ruined farmhouse, probably part of a vanity shattered by artillery. He kept it in his pocket without thinking, rubbing his thumb over the cracked edge while staring at the German-held ridge. Something about the reflection, how it distorted shapes, how it captured the world without exposing the body behind it, made him pause. An idea sprouted, crude and almost stupid in its simplicity. But in war, the line between stupid and brilliant was usually just measured in how long you stayed alive. That morning, as the wind ripped over the slope, Harlow lay flat in a shallow depression behind a rock, hands steady, breath slow. The German sniper had fired 3 times already, hitting 2 mules and forcing a platoon to halt in the open for nearly 10 minutes. The man was good, methodical, patient. But Harlow had something new, something improvised, something no training manual would ever approve. He pulled the shard of mirror from his breast pocket. The idea was reckless. Any reflective glint could give away a position. Any mistake could get him killed. But Harlow wasn't trying to signal or flash sunlight. He was trying to see. To observe the ridge without lifting his head high enough for a German scope to catch the outline of a helmet. He angled the mirror just right, catching the faint forms across the slope. Upside down, curved, distorted, but visible. And then he saw it. A barely perceptible movement near a tangle of rocks where snow had gathered in an unnatural shape. It wasn't much, just a shift, the kind a tired man makes when adjusting his rifle stock under his cheek. But the mirror caught it. It bent the shape, but revealed the truth. Harlow breathed slowly, aligning his rifle with the direction of the hidden nest. He didn't aim directly. He used the mirrored angle to adjust his shot, compensating for distortion the way a guitarist adjusts for a bent string. The cold bit at his fingers. His heartbeat thudded softly in his ears. He let out a long breath and squeezed. The shot cracked across the valley. Silence followed. No response. No countershot. Men below hesitated, unsure if anything had changed. Then someone shouted, "Movement stopped! He's down! He's down!" It should have ended there. One sniper eliminated, one brief advantage gained. But instead, something else happened. Something that would define Harlow's legend in the coming days. Killing the German wasn't the trick. The trick was how he found him. The trick was the mirror. The trick was seeing without being seen. Word spread fast. Soldiers whispered, "Harlow's using a mirror." Others laughed. "A mirror? Is he crazy?" But the ones who saw what he did that morning understood. His stupid trick wasn't stupid at all. It gave him eyes where no sniper should have them. By noon, Harlow had killed 2 more German marksmen, both of them veterans, both well hidden. He never once exposed the top of his helmet. He never once lost the low angle. He was beginning to understand that he had stumbled into a method nobody had taught him, and nobody could counter easily. The mirror didn't just help him spot, it helped him bait. It helped him manipulate angles. It helped him look like he was somewhere else entirely. And as snow thickened and Allied units pushed closer to the monastery ruins, Sam Harlow realized something unsettling. The mirror trick worked too well. It made him 5 times faster, 5 times more precise, 5 times more lethal than any sniper he'd met. But it also made him a target for someone else, someone watching him just as he was watching them. Because the Germans didn't send just one sniper to Monte Cassino. They sent their best, and the death of the first one had already been reported up the ridge. The man coming for Harlow was no ordinary marksman, and by the end of the week, both armies would speak his name with a mix of awe and dread. The snow eased by mid-afternoon, but the clouds hung low and heavy over Monte Cassino, pressing the grey sky down onto the shattered ridges like a lid on a boiling pot. The guns never fully stopped. Artillery thundered sporadically from both sides, echoing through the valley in deep, rolling waves. Men moved like shadows between stone walls and olive trunks stripped bare by shrapnel. But amidst all the chaos and movement, one thing remained eerily still: the ridge where the German snipers had been operating. Silence, too much silence, had settled there. Sam Harlow felt it immediately. He crouched behind a collapsed stone terrace with 2 infantrymen who had been assigned as runners. Both men were younger than him, barely 20, their helmets too big for their heads and their eyes too jumpy to hide the fear of being watched through a scope. Harlow didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that calmed the air around it. "You 2 stay behind this wall," he said. "Don't move unless I tell you." The younger private swallowed hard. "You think there's more of them?" Harlow didn't answer. He didn't need to. He had grown up hunting coyotes across open grasslands. He knew the way predators behaved, how they tested their territory, how they reacted when one of their own went silent. Snipers weren't much different. They studied patterns. They watched for breaks in rhythm, and when something disrupted their fragile balance, like the sudden death of an expert marksman, they adjusted with dangerous precision. Across the ridge, a German spotter lay hidden among the rubble of an old stone staircase. The man watched through binoculars, searching for the faintest sign of movement from the American side. He had seen the bare glint of a mirror earlier, not enough to identify a position, but enough to trigger alarm. The Germans believed the Americans had developed a new trick. Something clever, something unexpected, something worth countering. And so they had sent someone. His name was Oberjäger Wilhelm Kreuser, and though Sam Harlow did not yet know it, Kreuser was watching him even now. Kreuser was a veteran of the Eastern Front. 7 winters in the forests near Leningrad had taught him more about camouflage than most men learned in a lifetime. He rarely spoke, he rarely smiled, but he was feared, by Russians who tried to hunt him, and by Germans who fought beside him. His reputation was built not on the number of men he killed, but the way he killed them. Slow, patient, strategic. He studied his targets for hours, sometimes days, before taking a single shot, and now his eyes were fixed on the low American positions below Monte Cassino. Harlow didn't know Cruz was there. But he felt the presence of something, a shift in the air, a pressure, the unmistakable sensation of being observed by someone who understood angles as well as he did. He gripped the mirror in his glove, running his thumb over the cold surface. The trick had worked so well earlier that it almost felt like cheating. But now, as he peered over the ridge without exposing himself, he sensed an intelligence studying the terrain in return. He angled the mirror just a fraction to the left. Nothing. A fraction to the right. Still nothing. But then, at the very edge of the mirror's warped reflection, he saw a small flick of black. Not movement. Not a shadow. Just the slightest indentation where snow clung more thickly to a particular patch of rock. Harlow froze. The distortion made the shape difficult to judge. But it reminded him of something familiar, the subtle dip created when someone lay still for a very long time, letting snow accumulate over them like camouflage. Cruz. He didn't know the name yet, but he felt the precision of the man behind that indentation. Whoever was lying in that snowy hollow wasn't ordinary. They weren't sloppy. They weren't hurried. They were waiting for him. Harlow slid down behind the stone wall, breathing quietly. He needed to think. The mirror trick worked because it let him see without exposing himself. But the German up there, this invisible predator, would adapt. He would study reflections. He would calculate angles. He would watch for distortions of light. Harlow knew he could die if he underestimated the man behind that hidden nest. The two young runners watched him anxiously. "Sir, what do we do?" "I'm not an officer," Harlow murmured, his eyes fixed on the ridge. "But you're going to stay put for a while?" One of the privates nodded, trembling. "Is he up there, the sniper who killed the mule drivers?" "No," Harlow said quietly. "That one's dead. This one's worse." The ridge remained still. Harlow considered returning to a safer position farther downhill, but retreat wasn't an option. Command needed the ridge cleared. The infantry below couldn't advance with a sniper, especially one like this, covering the valley. He looked at the mirror again. The trick had been improvised, but it wasn't random. Mirrors reversed angles. They shifted perspective. They let a man break the predictable lines of vision that snipers relied on. But mirrors also betrayed glints, if mishandled. One wrong movement, and Cruz would fire faster than a thought. The challenge now wasn't to spot the German. It was to outthink him. Harlow slowly crawled to the edge of the terrace, keeping the mirror low and angled toward the ground. He caught another faint reflection. The same snow indentation, the same unnatural shape. It hadn't moved, but Cruz was still there, watching, calculating. The German sniper had not fired. That alone terrified Harlow. A sniper who didn't shoot was a sniper who was learning. Harlow's breath came out in a thin fog. He had to break the man's rhythm. He had to make Cruz believe he had a target before he actually revealed himself. So he used the mirror differently. Instead of looking toward Cruz, he angled the mirror so Cruz would see it. A faint glint, subtle, deliberate. Just enough to draw his eye without giving an exact location. A tiny spark of reflected light shot across the ridge like a message. Harlow knew the German would react in one of two ways. Either he would fire, or he would reposition. Repositioning meant movement. Movement meant vulnerability. Seconds passed. Snow shifted on the ridge. A subtle motion, barely noticeable, ran through the indentation, like a ripple in powder. Cruz was adjusting, not foolishly, but with the slow, practiced precision of a man who had survived 7 winters hunting other snipers. Harlow locked onto the direction of the ripple. This was it. He waited, waited longer than seemed possible. Then he fired. The rifle cracked like thunder. Snow exploded upward in a violent spray. The two privates ducked instinctively. Harlow held his breath, listening for a retaliatory shot. Silence. For a full 10 seconds, no movement came from the ridge. Then, something unexpected. A shape shifted upward. Not a body, not a rifle, A white cloth. Cruz was alive, and he was signalling, but not surrender. The cloth was waving side to side, slowly, deliberately. A sniper's acknowledgement, a challenge accepted, a promise that the duel wasn't over. Harlow felt a cold shiver run through him, not from the wind, but from the realization that he had just entered into a personal battle with a man who would not stop until one of them lay dead in the snow. Harlow hardly slept that night. The wind scraped over the valley like a living thing, carrying the distant crack of rifles, the mutter of artillery fire, and the groaning collapse of shattered walls higher up the mountain. Men coughed in their foxholes, boots thumped along frozen ground, and somewhere in the dark, the monastery tower creaked like old bone. But under all of that, below the ordinary noises of war, Harlow heard something else: expectation. Because he knew the German sniper, Cruz, though he still didn't know the man's name, had not retreated. He hadn't surrendered. He hadn't fled deeper into the ruins. The way he waved that strip of cloth had been too calm, too deliberate. It had been a statement. Tomorrow, the duel continues, and Harlow wasn't sure he would win. He lay in a shallow dugout with his rifle across his chest and the mirror tucked inside his jacket. The shard pressed coldly against his ribs, but he didn't remove it. The mirror had become something more than a trick. It had become a second set of eyes. But against a man like Cruz, it might not be enough. At dawn, the fog rose early, thick and yellow-grey, like a bruised veil pulling itself across the valley. It crawled through the olive trees, draped itself over broken terraces, and pooled in the depressions where shell fire had turned farmland into craters. Visibility vanished past 20 yards. Men cursed. Officers muttered. Runners hesitated. But Harlow's pulse quickened for another reason. Fog favoured the hunter who could see differently. Fog favoured the mirror. He moved alone toward the same terrace he'd used the previous day. The air tasted metallic, like wet limestone and the residue of old explosions. Frost clung to the edges of shattered stones. The world around him felt suspended, timeless, breathless. Somewhere across that fog, Cruz was waiting. Harlow eased himself onto his stomach, pressing against the ground, and pulled out the mirror. Even through the haze, its surface caught the faint outlines of shapes. Blurred, warped, ghost-like. The fog bent the reflection, making distant objects dissolve into one another. But Harlow didn't need clarity. He needed movement, shape, rhythm. He angled the mirror low. Nothing. He angled it again. The same unnatural snow formation was there, but beneath the fog it looked different, broader, deeper, more deceptive. It could have been Cruz, or just an empty imprint where he'd lain the day before. Then Harlow noticed something he had overlooked. The fog shifted in the hollow in a strange way, like air was being drawn inward, ever so slightly, in the slow rhythm of breathing. Harlow had him, but he didn't fire, because if he saw that breathing pattern, Cruz would know someone was watching him. And a sniper like Cruz, once alerted, did not stay still. He repositioned, he adapted, he survived. Harlow steadied his own breathing, preparing his shot, but then stopped. A movement to the left, faint, barely visible through the mirror's distortion. Had Cruz moved? No. That was a distraction, a decoy, a small pile of stones arranged recently, a deliberate misdirection placed where an impatient sniper might fire. Cruz wanted Harlow to shoot the decoy, reveal his location, and die a second later. Harlow exhaled slowly. Not this time. He kept the mirror angled downward, studying every blur, every flicker of fog. The snow in the hollow pulsed in and out. The decoy to the left stood perfectly still. He waited. Minutes passed. 5, 10. The fog thickened. The world vanished into pale grey. The cold seeped into his fingertips, making the trigger feel heavier than it should have. Then something remarkable happened. A sound. So soft he almost mistook it for another shift in the wind. A click. Metal on stone. A rifle bolt. Just barely nudged. by frozen fingers adjusting position. Cruz was preparing to fire. At him. Harlow didn't think. He moved. He rolled 3 feet to the right, pressing against a wet patch of earth, keeping the mirror angled up as he moved. A muzzle flash erupted on the ridge. Snow burst behind the rock where Harlow's head had been. Cruz had anticipated the mirror's angle. He had aimed where Harlow should have been, but Harlow had already broken the pattern. He saw the muzzle flash a full second after the round hit the stone. Fog obscured everything. But the flash gave him direction, a bright, brief phantom in the mirror's warped surface. Harlow's rifle rose. He didn't aim by the pattern of the ridge, he aimed by the reflection. He fired. A sharp, guttural cry echoed faintly across the valley. Then silence. Deep, smothering silence. Harlow stayed frozen, staring at the mirror. The fog parted slightly, as if the mountain held its breath. The indentation in the snow, Cruz's hiding place, shifted in a strange, collapsing motion. Then a figure rolled partially into view. A silhouette, a rifle. A man clutching at his abdomen, dragging himself a few inches before falling flat. The duel was over, but something in Harlow resisted the triumph. He crawled forward through the fog, rifle still ready, moving slowly up the slope. Frost bit into his palms. Stones crunched under his weight. He approached the ridge inch by inch until he reached the body, lying half buried in snow. Cruz was older than Harlow had expected. Harsh lines cut through his weathered face. His beard was coarse and grey. His eyes, still sharp even in death, reflected the pale fog like 2 dimmed pieces of glass. Between his gloves, Harlow noticed something that made him pause. A tiny mirror shard, no larger than Harlow's own. Cruz had been using one too, not to mimic Harlow, but because he had used the trick first, somewhere in the forests of Leningrad, maybe years earlier. 2 hunters from opposite sides, using the same stupid trick, meeting in the ruins of an ancient monastery. Harlow bowed his head, not out of respect for the enemy, but in acknowledgement of the duel they had fought. A duel of angles, of patience, of perception, a duel that could only end one way. Footsteps crunched behind him. The 2 young runners approached cautiously, rifles held low. One of them swallowed hard. "Is that him?" Harlow nodded. The private looked uneasy. "Did you get him because of the mirror thing again?" Harlow didn't answer at first. He looked down at Cruz's mirror fragment one last time before speaking. "No," he said quietly. "I got him because he expected me to use it the same way I did yesterday. He thought I'd stick to the trick." The private frowned. "So what did you do instead?" Harlow slid his mirror back into his pocket. "I broke my own pattern." The fog thinned as the sun struggled to rise behind the clouds, casting a faint glow over the battlefield. The monastery ruins loomed above them, ghost-like, ancient, torn apart by a war neither sniper would live to see the end of. The runners waited, expecting Harlow to say more, but he simply turned and walked downhill toward the American lines, rifle slung over his shoulder, boots sinking into the softening snow. Behind him, the valley remained quiet. Men would later whisper about the duel between the 2 unseen killers. They'd say Harlow was 5 times deadlier than any German sniper. They'd say he saw through stone, through fog, through deception itself. They'd say his stupid mirror trick turned him into something supernatural. But Harlow never spoke of it. He knew the truth. The mirror didn't make him deadlier. Understanding the man on the other end of the scope did. And by the end of that brutal winter, both armies had learned one thing. Sam Harlow wasn't just another sniper. He was the man who rewrote the rules of how snipers hunt each other.